Florida State has several more key visitors coming in from the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime recruiting analyst and college football writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I also want to thank you for putting up with any background noises you hear today because I am in a hotel in Orlando covering the Under Armour All-American game. So I apologize, I don't have my microphone with me. But we're going to cover the transfer portal possibilities over the next few days. January 1st opens another period by the NCAA to allow transfers to make visits. The Noles are certainly taking advantage. So there are 6 players I'm going to discuss, and then we'll kind of just get into overall what this means for Florida State. So just going to go from January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd. These were reported by different places. Noles 24/7 in particular, I use that quite a bit. And I just want to talk about them from a pro football focus grade and their fit for Florida State. So first off, the player that I think is really fun to talk about is Rahsul Faison. He's a running back from Utah State. And this was one of the positions that I didn't think Florida State was going to necessarily hit. It depended. Maybe there is something else going on. I don't know. Maybe it's a fit for what Malzahn wants to do, but this is competition. The transfer portal is all about that. So let's talk about Rahsul in terms of his style, how big he is, and everything else. Because to be honest, this is a really productive player. He's got a couple of years of eligibility. So I'm going to share my screen for those of you on YouTube, and I'm going to go over all the stats for those of you listening. Either way, we're going to get to a lot of stats and some interesting situations with Faison. First off, 5'11", 200 pounds. This is a downhill running back, but one that adds 2 things that are a little bit unique. Every now and then he'll throw a spin move on you. And secondarily, he has a really good ability to move laterally. Jump cuts or just 1 foot in the ground and taking a 45-degree angle while he uses a stiff arm or something else to try to keep a guy away from him. He's adept at making guys miss despite being a guy that will run over you too. Having that combination should excite any coach. He's from Pennsylvania originally, so it's unique that he ended up at Utah State. But here are a few of the statistics of note for this young man. First off, on the year for 2024, he had 1,107 yards rushing per Pro Football Focus, 5.6 yards per tote, 8 touchdowns. So obviously a productive player. I also like the fact that he played the entire season. He had the opportunity to be the main back for them. And to be honest with you, he's a guy that was used to carrying the load quite a bit. So looking at the numbers overall, he had 5 games, he had 20 or more carries. That's a good sign. So he's used to carrying that load. And he's also a guy that found a way to the end zone. Again, 8 scores is important to me because he's a guy that's going to get used in the red zone. Malzahn's offenses, as a general rule, will try to pound it in inside the 10. But if that doesn't work, obviously they'll throw the ball too. But it starts with the inside zone, inside gap, trap, different plays like that for what they're going to do. Faison fits the style from when I covered Malzahn at UCF. And he's a little bit like some of the guys they've had there for the Knights. So I think Cam Davis is a really good fit for this offense. Maybe Faison could be another one that's a good fit. I think it'd be interesting what Singleton can do. Florida State wants to load up on the running back. So January 1st is when he's going to come in. Far as his grades go, offensive grade is 79.2. Running grade, this is really high, 88.3. And his ability to hit those marks consistently, looking at him overall from the season, game to game, he was pretty strong throughout the season. Best game he had was against Hawaii, 86.5 grade as a runner. That's extremely high. And it's also towards the end of the year. Again, durability for a running back or any position is really, really important. But he also had the ability to do that late in the year. A lot of guys get nicked up and they don't perform at as near a high level. Looking at some of his big plays, he had 30 carries of 10 or more yards. That's also important. I talk about hitting big plays in the run game because it changes the passing game for you. They bring another guy in the box, makes it easier for your receivers, tight ends, and even running backs to catch the football and be productive, consistently productive. Faison did that. And he's also a player that did it, whether it was zone, whether it was gap. It didn't matter what scheme it has. If you're looking here on Pro Football Focus, he had a lot of plays in both. But zone, he had 66 plays, 130 were gap. Either way, he was a very productive runner. So I'm not really worried about that. As far as his ability to catch the football, this is a guy that is probably better defined as a traditional running back, but he did have a few receptions. He had 22. 99 yards. It was probably more check downs. I didn't really watch much of his film catching the ball. I just watched him running, and I knew right away that he was a pretty good player. But overall, pass blocking, he was just okay because he had a few games that were low, but most of them were in the 60s, 70s range, and overall 52.3. As far as a receiver, he wasn't that great. They rated him 48.9, so that's something you'll have to pick up if you want to make a big impact with the Noles, because Malzahn does like to throw to the running backs. So that's something to think about for Faison. Also, all of these guys, I'm probably going to do individual films if you want to go check them out again on YouTube. I've got a YouTube tab just for the transfer portal. If you want to go back later and look at something, I'll cut these up, each and every one of them, including Faison. Next up, let's talk about another guy that's also a very impactful possibility for the Noles, and another guy that's supposed to come in on the 1st. Just as a keynote here, a lot of these guys could change their dates. This isn't as ironclad, as I've noted many times on Locked On Seminoles, with the ability to come in different times. Recruits generally out of the high school ranks, they set it in advance. That's when they visit. The portal is a little bit different that I found. So I just wanted to kind of mention that as well. The next player in question is also very impactful in terms of his ability to make plays, because his stats over the last 3 years have been really good, over 90 tackles each of the last 2 years. Marquise Watson Trent. This is a guy at Georgia Southern, and it's a player that, quite honestly, didn't play much his first couple of years and then burst onto the scene as a junior. Had a really, really good year. And then the last 2 years were also excellent. He's got one more year of eligibility. And to be honest with you, I don't think there's going to be many schools that wouldn't be interested in him. If you have production over 90 tackles back-to-back seasons, it's not very difficult to understand why somebody would be interested in you. This is not going to be a player that's going to sit the bench anywhere. So 5'11", 225. If you look at his overall stats, he had 747 snaps. He had 321 of those against the run. As a pass rusher, 68. Coverage, 358. So he's balanced. He plays all downs. That's a good sign. The biggest stat for me, though, isn't like the tackles. He had over 90 this past season. But it's the stops. Pro Football Focus rates a stop as something that is at the line of scrimmage or at least close to it. He had 32 of those. Going through the game by game, there wasn't a single contest where he didn't have at least one. That's really impressive. And to be honest, there were only 2 games that he only had one. Most of them were 2 or more. And he had 7 against Marshall. I don't know what he was doing against Marshall, but he ate him up. Also of note, he started every game, but not all at the same position. Middle linebacker and weak side linebacker were positions for Marquise Watson Trent. And again, 5'11", 225, that kind of fits the profile of an inside backer. So I'm not surprised by that, but it's good that he's played multiple areas on a defense, because they might use him in Tony White's defense differently at Florida State if he decides to become a Nole. I also like the fact that he's played several years. He's going to come in and help the locker room and be a guy, if they get him, that can really kind of share knowledge about college football and what it takes to be good. He's the guy who ended up at Georgia Southern, didn't have immediate success. He walked through that locker room for a couple of years as just a guy that was trying to make special teams. Then his 3rd year, he made it. This is something we don't see every year in college football, guys sticking it out. So Watson Trent, I give a lot of credit to. When we come back, we're going to talk more about some of the portal guys that the Noles are trying to bring in for visits. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. Did Rockin' Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for more than once? That's definitely happened to a lot of people, and it's happened to me and many others that have paid for subscriptions that they probably didn't want to have. Rockin' Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, and it's going to get rid of those subscriptions so you can help your spending habits, and get your goals to where you want to hit for this next year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. For me, I know that I forget about stuff sometimes, and I get mad when I go back through my account on my phone and I see stuff that I should have gotten rid of. They have a subscription tracker for Rocket Money that really can help you, so that's why it's a great app. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right. Florida State has 4 more visitors we're going to talk about, so let's dive back in. The next player in question is one that, quite honestly, hasn't played quite as much, but he's another linebacker with some upside. 6'1", 225 pounds. His name is Caleb Laaly. He's at North Carolina. He is now in the portal. He had 14 tackles, according to college CFB stats. Pro Football Focus has him with fewer, and I'm going to show the grades for him. But overall, here's the key. This is a kid out of Georgia, played good high school football, went to Carolina for a year. They've obviously got Bill Belichick there. So it's a unique scenario. I think that more teams are going to be careful about doing. We've talked about this quite a bit on Locked On Seminoles. If you're going to take a guy that doesn't have a lot of stats, did you recruit him out of high school? Is he familiar with some of the things that you do? Guys on your staff know him, etc. I wouldn't be surprised if this is somebody the Florida State staff overall, even though it's changed quite a bit, is familiar with. I don't remember watching him live personally, and I might have in 7-on-7 or something else. But with that in mind, I do know that he's a guy that was coveted by several schools. So one of his visits is going to be to the Noles, probably going to be, again, January 1st, but we'll see if that ends up panning out. He played 49 snaps this past season. He's a guy that played pretty much across the board in terms of all the games. I was going through which games he went through. So he got some playing time, but it wasn't in a lot of critical situations. My guess is Carolina probably had a lot of experienced linebackers. Most programs like them do. It's a big state school. That's not surprising, but that's not the point here. Florida State needs not only guys like the last player we talked about who's got a ton of experience at Georgia Southern. They have to get some guys in the underclassmen ranks because Florida State missed. Quite frankly, they missed with all these players over and over again the last 2-3 years at linebacker. It's been a sore subject here on Locked On Seminoles. It's been a sore subject on any message board you go to that covers the Noles. It's just the way it is. They got to make up for that. And you're going to have to take a few guys in the underclassmen ranks to balance out your depth chart from year to year. And there's not really any other way to do it, but take guys that are at the transfer portal. So they do need to hit the 26 class hard, get at least 3 more linebackers, if not 4. But this is a good start. Here are the grades. And again, I don't put a lot of stock in this because he only had 49 total snaps. Take that for what it's worth. Defense 35.3, 69.8 for run defense. Pass coverage was 30.2. He had like 20 snaps or something in like regular defense. I mean, I don't put a lot of stock in it, but it is what it is. I'm more concerned about where he was, what he did, what he was as a recruit. I know he played in Georgia. This is the kind of kid that Florida State could probably end up developing over time. Like, look at it this way. Nicholson is a good linebacker at Florida State. He played a little bit his freshman year, but we really didn't know if he was going to develop during the 2024 season. He got about midway through the year, and all of a sudden he really took off. Second-year players can do that, but you got to develop, you got to coach him. We'll see if that works out for Laaly, but Florida State is going to bring him in the next week or so. Hopefully it'll be the first, but again, I'm just weary of this. I imagine a lot of these kids are probably going to change their dates around. That just happens quite a bit. They get tired of the travel, and that's cool. I don't have any problem with that. Next up on the list is a big man. Talked about him a little bit before. His name is Jason Jenkins. Defensive linemen with height and length are difficult to find, especially ones that can maneuver at over 250 pounds. Well, Jason Jenkins is 6'6", 281 per Pro Football Focus. So again, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to talk a little bit about him. Playing in the SEC helps. He was one of their key defenders off the bench for the Vols. I knew they were going to lose some guys to the portal, but seeing him come on, I'm sure his phone lit up pretty quickly. Just can't teach the measurables is the first part of it. Secondarily, with a 3-3-5 defense, 6'6" defensive ends, he could be your strong side end. Probably play a little nose guard if you wanted him to, especially in pass rushing situations. That's a good sign. Here are the numbers for him. This past year, 214 snaps, defensive grade of 75.5, run defense 72, tackling 70.7, and his pass rush 75.2. He had 4 total pressures. He had 2 sacks, 2 hurries. He had 6 tackles and 4 assisted tackles for 10 overall, according to Pro Football Focus. He had 7 stops. This kind of looks like to me he's a run stuffer, a power player. I don't know a lot about him. They rotate quite a bit at Tennessee. They had a good D-line this year, but I don't know what his best attribute is. I have not watched his film at length yet. I do know that he was a highly recruited kid that ended up going to Tennessee. And again, the length is there. Florida State needs more D linemen that fit the 3-3-5 in terms of a physical traits point of view. That's something this kid's going to do. If Florida State gets him, it would be a win. Jenkins, there aren't many guys like him in the portal already. Any good D linemen that go in the portal, they're usually gone pretty quick. So Florida State getting him on campus is a win within itself. All right. Next up, another player that they're looking to get D linemen have that length. This kid is Damonte Diggs. He played at Coastal Carolina, 6'5", 260 pounds. And this is a young man, again. It's a little bit different depending on which kid it is, but he's a player that has played quite a bit. Getting some valuable experience, kind of like with Jenkins, would be really good for Florida State. 6'5", 260, I think. I'm not positive, but I think he would be more likely in a 3-3-5 to play the weak side, hand in the dirt defensive end spot. But at the same time, maybe he could move over, depending if he adds a little weight, and play some strong side as well. A lot of those guys are 280 and above like Jenkins. We'll see. But here are some of the numbers for this young man from Coastal Carolina this past season. Total snaps, 407. So obviously he's a pretty durable player. That's a lot of reps for a defensive lineman. Defensive grade, 63.9. Run defense, 68.3. Tackling, 62.5. Pass rush, 56.5. They even got a coverage grade for him. I hope to not see him in coverage much at all, but they got him at 58.7. Also of note here, one more that I thought there would be, pressure, 16. That's a lot for a big guy like that playing the end. I'm curious to see what he does if he comes to Florida State, how they would use him. That's a pretty good number. Only 2 sacks, but that's okay. If you get to the quarterback, oftentimes the best play isn't to get the quarterback on the ground. It's to get him to throw it up in the air when he shouldn't. Those are the biggest plays in college football that lead to interceptions and pick sixes. So tackles, he had a total of 33, and he had 25 stops. Again, that's a lot. I know it's Coastal Carolina. Their schedule isn't as dominant as some of the others, but they did play a few decent teams. They played Virginia, for instance. That's a good football program. They played Marshall. They just won their league. I'm curious to see what this kid can do, and it's probably going to be a pretty good battle to get him. I'm sure his NIL package would be pretty substantial because that's an experienced player that's proven himself. As a note that I brought up the other day, Indiana went this route with a bunch of kids like this that weren't Power 4 this past year, but they went for production. I think that's a really good idea. I think production trumps what the high school grade was because some kids just don't develop the right habits at the college level and they don't make it. And it's not a lack of talent. Do you contribute to what the weight room guys are supposed to be telling you and doing it? Strength coaches, they're not the easiest guys to do it. Can you adapt to that? The nutrition plan, it's important. Experience will certainly help you in that regard. Next up, let's talk about another player that has some talent, but on the offensive side of the ball. And it's a kid, ironically, that is from Tallahassee, Traylon Ray. This is a player that Florida State didn't get out of high school. I don't think they really prioritized him. We'll see if that changes here soon because he's supposed to come in on the 3rd. 6'1", 195 pounds. Again, he's from Tallahassee originally. This past season, he had quite a good year. 28 catches, 426 yards, 15.2, and 4 scores. He's a guy that averaged over 30 yards per catch on plays of 20 or more yards in the air. And here are his overall grades. Offense, 68.8. Receiving, 68.3. His drop rate, a little concerning, 56.7. But deep threats, if you're coached up, I like what Florida State can do now that they got Tim Harris Jr. there. I'm not too worried about that. And he's a guy that's going to make plays down the field. As a matter of fact, I'll share that as well, just to talk about the receiving depth. I think that's one of the most important things that Pro Football Focus does. If you look at the 20-plus range, if you're on YouTube channel, that's really impressive. But here are the numbers overall. 25.5% of his targets for Ray were 20 or more yards down the field. He caught 4 of those and 168 yards, 42 yards of reception. That's really impressive. Like, those are humongous numbers. I don't know what else to say, but to put it in perspective like this, if you can hit home runs just every couple of games, it will change what a defense does against you. Not many teams have players that hit the ball down the field. And I reached out to somebody that knows him. I said, what can you tell me about Ray? And he said, look, Florida State need guys that can make contested catches. I guarantee you he will be a guy that can do that. That was the first thing I was told. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's a really good sign, because catching a 50-50 ball is such a momentum shift. I don't think many people realize just how important that is. And Ray's one of those guys, 42 yards a catch down the field, that's pretty important. Just since I've got it on the screen here, over the middle, those 10 to 15, 20-yard kind of deals, he had a pretty good year for that too. 157 yards and 2 scores. He had 10 catches there. Some of the shorter passes up to 9 yards. He had 9 catches, and then behind the line of scrimmage, he caught 5 screens. Overall, Florida State needs at least one more receiver, if not 2. This would be a really good fit to go on with Deuce Robinson. Smaller than Deuce. I mean, he's 6'6", but still decent size at 6'1", 95. And again, FBS experience at the Power 4 level with proven production. I think Florida State could do a lot worse than somebody like him. Next up, I want to just kind of summarize a few things about the portal and what Florida State has going on. I think they need a couple more things to happen, and they're doing the right things right now, but there's a little bit more. Next on Locked On Seminoles. Can Florida State finish up their transfer portal class, at least before the spring window, really strong? To make that happen, I think there are 2 key ingredients. Number one, the effort. The staff has done a good job. The recruiting staff, the people in the back office, got to give them props along with the coaching staff. Malzahn coming in, Tim Harris Jr., Coach White, Coach Potrose, all those guys across the board. They've gotten a great group. And it's been a really united front. Well, that has to continue. That's number one. From the athletic department to just all the assistant athletic directors, the main people, everybody has to be on page 1 all the way through the back of the manuscript. They all have to be reading this the same way, because it's worked. Don't deviate from the plan. You're hitting home runs with the portal so far, especially I think Deuce. He's about as important player for any school in the country, and the Florida State Seminoles got him. But now you got to finish out. To do that, I think the other part, and this is part 2, has to also work out. And I don't know what the numbers are here, but the NIL numbers, you have to pay market value to a certain extent. But here's the caveat. How well do you continue to do it and not overwhelm your roster? Like, hey, you just brought in this guy for this amount. Why aren't we getting more compensation? That fine line, I don't know how that works. I'm not going to say that I understand all the nuances, but that's something Florida State's got to do. And if they can stay on the same page, the entire athletic department, on who they're going after, their style, what they want, they should be okay there. But sometimes it comes down to dollars and cents. You may have to say no to protect your locker room and the future of your program. You can't bring in one really good player, then lose 2 that are maybe a year away. It's a fine line. I'm not saying I have the answers on that, but you got to read the room. Only the coaches, the strength coaches, the back office staff, they know those players. They see them on a daily basis. They have to be able to read the room. It's going to be really important, because some of the guys, like, just as an example, Rahsul Faison, I imagine based on the 2 years that he was at Utah State, I'm just using him as an example, he's going to have plenty of opportunities. Does Florida State bring him in? And even if everybody in the locker room and the running back room is cool with him coming, how much do you pay so you have enough money at other spots too? There's a lot of ways to look at it. NIL is a really unique tool, but one that's got to be respected. I'll be back tomorrow with more Locked On Seminoles. Thank you very much for coming in and checking us out. I will see you again on Tuesday.